It's kind of a running joke that Tolkien talks a lot about trees in The Lord of the Rings, and while that is a bit hyperbolic, he does say the word tree over 600 times in the story. Some of it is completely fictional, some of it integrates real-life plant lore, and all of it is fueled by Tolkien's fiery passion for green, growing things and the ancient wild world that he feels had passed him by. Today, I'm going to walk you through almost all the plants of Middle-earth to try and uncover how even the tiniest details of Tolkien's works transcend good world building and become something else entirely. As you may have noticed, I'm outside right now, and my camera quality is a little lower, as is my microphone quality. That is because I filmed this video last week outdoors in location, and it turns out that the first 5 minutes of the footage are completely unusable because of wind noise. I was able to get the wind noise out of most of the rest of the video, even though it's a little bit blustery, but I hope you guys will forgive me. So we're gonna do the first 5 minutes of this video here with my phone propped up on my laptop, which is sitting on a rock on a picnic bench while I am on vacation with my family, and then later on we'll cut to the actual footage from the day. Hey, you guys say you like outdoor videos, and I thought this would be perfectly appropriate, but sometimes technical difficulties are technically difficult, so please do forgive me for that. The first plant that comes to mind when I think about the flora of Middle-earth is kingsfoil. It's the herb used by Aragorn to heal Frodo after he receives the wound on Weathertop, and although everyone else thinks of it as a weed, Aragorn knows its true name, athelas. Athelas was brought to Middle-earth by the Númenóreans, and now it springs up all over the place, specifically in the shady spots where Númenórean rangers and troops once camped. It's described as having long, dark leaves, and I think it could be best compared to the medicinal herb comfrey. Comfrey, just like athelas, grows in shady, damp places, and it's known for its anti-inflammatory properties, and it's been used for centuries all across the world to treat everything from arthritis to sprains. But the one place where comfrey doesn't match athelas super well is in its scent. Athelas is described as having this incredibly distinct, sweet and wholesome fragrance, which is so obvious that Aragorn is able to find the herb whilst in the dark on Weathertop. And it seems to be in that smell where the magic of athelas lies. Taking 2 leaves, Aragorn laid them on his hands and breathed on them, and then he crushed them, and straightway a living freshness filled the room, as if the air itself awoke and tingled, sparkling with joy. And then he cast the leaves into the bowls of steaming water that were brought to him, and at once all hearts were lightened, for the fragrance that came to each was like a memory of dewy mornings of unshadowed sun in some land of which the fair world in spring is itself but a fleeting memory. The distinct scent of athelas perhaps matches better with an herb like mint or basil. In fact, the name of basil is derived from the Latin basilicum, which means the king's herb. It was used as a fragrance for royal perfumes, and this association with royalty, with kingship, matches very well with kingsfoil. Athelas is not just medicine, it's not just perfume. In the hands of the king, it is something entirely different. There's an old Gondorian rhyme that reads, "When the black breath blows and death's shadow grows and all lights pass, come athelas, life to the dying in the king's hand lying." In the hands of the king, athelas is transformed from a simple medicine into a blessing. He uses it to save Frodo, to heal Faramir and Éowyn, and just as the poem predicted, its sweet smell is able to banish the breath of evil. Athelas provides both physical healing and spiritual healing, representative of the power of the true king. Not only is he bold in battle, wise in matters of governance, but his hands are gentle and his presence is cleansing. I think it's incredibly poignant that one of the first things that we see Aragorn doing after saving the hobbits is healing Frodo with athelas. Even if he hasn't fully taken on the identity of the king, the athelas recognizes him as the king. But not all of Tolkien's flora is this blending of real-life plants into something very magical. Sometimes he takes the mundane and makes it magical without adding to its properties at all. Take, for example, Hemlock. Hemlock umbels are only ever mentioned in the story of Lúthien to Nuviel, the great beauty of the First Age. The daughter of an elf lord and a Maya, Lúthien is incredibly beautiful, graceful, and good, and her story begins with the human man Beren finding her dancing in the trees. The leaves were long, the grass was green, the hemlock umbels tall and fair, and in the glade a light was seen, of stars and shadows shimmering. To Nuviel was dancing there, to music of a pipe unseen, and light of stars was in her hair, and in her raiment glimmering. Nothing about that scene is distinctly unreal. It's not explicitly fantastical. It's all natural. The light of the stars in her hair, the long verdant grass, the hanging hemlock umbels. The enchantment comes from the pure beauty of Lúthien to Nuviel. This could be because this scene was directly inspired by Tolkien's own life and his own Lúthien. In Tolkien's official biography, Humphrey Carpenter explains the strange couple of years that he had after he was sent home from the war. He and his wife Edith had gotten married just before Tolkien shipped out, so once he got sent back to England, they had a lot to make up for. On days when he could get leave, he and Edith went for walks in the countryside. Near Roos, they found a small wood with an undergrowth of hemlock, and there they wandered. Ronald recalled of Edith as she was at this time. Her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes bright, and she could sing and dance. As indicated by their headstones, Edith was Tolkien's Lúthien to Nuviel, and she needed no real magic to enchant him. Her dancing and singing amongst the hemlocks was plenty enough to enchant him. Of course, it may not have been real poison hemlock that Edith was frolicking through. Cow parsley and hogweed bloom around this same time, around the same location, and look very similar to hemlock, but then again, the hogweed umbels, tall and fair, don't exactly have the same ring, so I understand why Tolkien stuck with hemlock. White flowers seem to have been a particular love of Tolkien's, as we also see them referenced in the flower Simbelmynë, or Evermind. It's a little white flower that Tolkien said is very similar to our world's anemone, in the same family as buttercups. Simbelmynë is known to grow only on the graves of the great lords of Gondor and Rohan, and really who can say how on a biological level these flowers work, but they seem to grow the most thickly on the greatest of the lords' tombs. Simbelmynë blooms all year round, and it acts as a pure white reminder of nobility, a memorial for kings long past. Maybe I'm only thinking about this because I just made a video about Tolkien's experiences in the war, but Simbelmynë can't help but remind me of the poppies used to represent memorial of the First World War. Poppies flourished, especially in France after the most terrible of battles, because the dirt had been upturned by shells. A lot of the times poppies would blossom over these battlefields. That feeling of watching these beautiful flowers pop up over the graves of the fallen was crystallized into poetry by Canadian doctor John McCrae. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. That poem was published in 1915, and it remains one of the most famous works of art to have come out of the First World War. Poppies were worn as a symbol of remembrance for the First World War, and they still are worn today. And if anyone understood the importance of remembering the fallen, of keeping their stories alive and beautiful even though time has passed, it would be Tolkien. But not all of Tolkien's plants are lofty and grand. Some of them are a symbol for everything that is homely and humble, such as pipeweed. Pipeweed was deemed so important that it got its own section in the prologue of The Lord of the Rings. There we learn all about what it is and how it came to be in Middle-earth, how it was brought to Middle-earth by the Númenóreans, but it really flourished in the Shire. They were the ones that learned how it could be smoked, and they perfected the process of growing, curing, and of course smoking it. Hobbits were better with pipeweed than anyone in Middle-earth, even wizards. Pipeweed is a symbol of home, of well-earned comforts, and even when they're packing lightly, the hobbits are sure to bring a bit of pipeweed along. What's fascinating is that pipeweed is one of many little historical anachronisms that fill out the world of The Lord of the Rings, especially in the case of the hobbits. Pipeweed is, despite what some people may want to believe, distinctly and specifically tobacco, and not anything else. Although you can believe whatever you want, I'm not going to stop you. Tolkien mentions that it is part of the Nicotiana family, as in nicotine, which is interesting because tobacco is not a European thing. However, there's something about hobbits, especially hobbits, that made Tolkien feel like they had to smoke. Tolkien himself really enjoyed smoking a pipe, a habit which he had learned from his guardian, who would only smoke pipes when they were out at the countryside. And funny enough, my dad actually did the same thing. Growing up, as far as I'm aware, he didn't smoke at all. But then once we moved to England, he bought a pipe and some tobacco, and he would smoke it while sitting by the fire or out on the porch. He just said that it was an essential part of the experience. I really can't disagree. I still really love the smell of pipe tobacco. That being said, this is a PSA. Don't smoke. It's bad for you. Pipeweed is not the only non-medieval habit that the hobbits have picked up. They're also said to drink tea and coffee, something that didn't come over into Europe until the 17th century. Hobbits are also notable for their consumption of potatoes, a food that came over from America far after the medieval period was long over. As with pipeweed, Tolkien suggests that potatoes were brought over by Númenóreans, which seems to be his kind of catch-all excuse for any American foods. Tolkien does refer to them as taters instead of the American-derived potatoes, probably in an attempt to make them feel more British, but the reality is that tobacco, tea, and taters were not in the medieval world, and The Lord of the Rings is based off of the medieval world, and yet Tolkien included them. He probably could have taken them out. In a later edition of The Hobbit, he took out reference to tomatoes. So why did he take out the tomatoes and leave in all of those other things? Well, there is a couple of reasons. Tomatoes may have been taken out because they are American in origin, but they also may have been taken out because The Hobbit begins at a time when tomatoes wouldn't be in season, and Tolkien loved getting little details like that right. I think the other anachronisms made the cut though, because they were things that had been so fully adopted by British culture. Certainly most of Middle-earth is medieval inspired, but hobbits have always been a little bit out of place. They were a little pocket of 19th century English culture tucked into this larger dramatic medieval world. Tolkien gave them anchors like pipes and taters to ground them in our familiar reality. By allowing hobbits these, for the world of Middle-earth, alien comforts, Tolkien sets them apart from the rest of Middle-earth and allows them to be very good audience surrogates. But as much as Tolkien loved flowers, herbs, and food, his true botanical love was in trees. Trees dominate Tolkien's legendarium to the point where the most peaceful and blissful time period of Tolkien's world is called the Years of the Trees. The trees in question were the great Telperion and Lothlórien. They were sung to life when Ardo was still cloaked in darkness, coaxed out of the earth by the chanting of the Valar Yavanna, and from them a great light spread out over Middle-earth. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were as shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each into a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossoms of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Thus began the Years of the Trees. Telperion, the silver one, would bloom first, and then in the later half of the day, Lothlórien would awake with its golden light. And then in that middle point of the day, the waxing and waning light would mix together, bathing Arda in a silver-gold light. The elves awoke in this soft twilight, and Middle-earth flourished. The trees would stand strong until the evil one, Morgoth, with the help of the giant spider Ungoliant, drained the trees of Valinor dry. The world was plunged into shadows, but the Valar were able to save one flower from Telperion and one fruit from Lothlórien, and these they set in the sky to become the sun and moon that we know today. Though the world would never again, thankfully, experience the darkness of the tree's destruction, it would also never again experience a light so vibrant, so alive. While, of course, no real trees can compare to these fantastical artifacts, it's hypothesized that Telperion would have looked sort of like a cherry blossom, whereas Lothlórien would look like a golden chain tree laden with these dripping blossoms. Great trees have always found a place in mythology. You have the great tree at the center of the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And while this tree certainly didn't glow, its fruit was incredibly precious, and the plucking of that fruit represented the world darkening, the pre-lapsarian innocence lost. There's also the Norse Yggdrasil, a great ash tree that supports the universe in its branches, its trunks being the connection between the different realms of existence. So the trees acted for all of Arda, being a support system for all of Iluvatar's creations. Although the great trees are now lost, their legacy echoes through all of the ages. Because Telperion had been so well beloved by the elves, Yavanna created a copy of it, identical in every single way except that it did not glow. This tree flourished in Tirion, and one of its seeds was brought to Numenor as a gift. This would grow to be Nimloth, the great white tree standing in the heart of the kingdom of men. It would be a symbol of the goodwill and friendship between men and elves. But this goodwill could not last forever. As Numenor began sliding into corruption, aided by Sauron, they began to look at Nimloth with resentment. The faithful, such as Elendil, saw the writing on the wall, and so he sent his son Isildur in the depths of the night to sneak into the palace to steal a seed of Nimloth, to keep it safe. Not long after, Sauron gained full control of the king of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn, and ordered him to cut Nimloth down, and its wood was used to light the first fire in Sauron's new temple to Morgoth. For there was an altar of fire in the midst of the temple, and in the topmost of the dome there was a louver, whence there issued a great smoke. And the first fire upon the altar Sauron kindled with the hewn wood of Nimloth, and it crackled and was consumed. But men marveled at the reek that went up from it, so that the land lay under a cloud for 7 days, until slowly it passed into the west. Nimloth was a promise of the goodwill between elves and men, and its destruction represents the severing of that bond, the first of the steps into Numenor's downfall. But not all was lost. The seed that Isildur took would be brought to the newly built city of Minas Tirith, and he would plant it, and it would grow, and it would fail, be uprooted and replanted as the tides of mankind's power shifted through the years. The White Tree of Gondor, as it came to be known, was a symbol of the true king, of the upholding of the rightful dynasty of Gondor. It is no trivial matter when Faramir, the son of the steward of Gondor, says, "For myself, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace." The White Tree of Gondor is a symbol of a rightly ordered world, and by replanting the sapling that he finds at the end of the Return of the King, Aragorn restores both his kingly justice and the bond between men and the higher powers. Tolkien uses the white tree as a metaphor for kingship, tracing the long lines of heritage from Telperion all the way to the White Tree of Gondor. But that is not the only noble line of trees that Tolkien crafted for Middle-earth. The mallorn tree first sprung up in Valinor, the beautiful haven of the Valar, and while Telperion was silver and Lothlórien was gold, the mallorn, that's the plural term for a mallorn tree, was both. Its bark was silver and smooth, and its boughs somewhat upswept after the manner of the beech. But it never grew save with a single trunk. Its leaves, like those of the beech but greater, were pale green above, and beneath were silver glistering in the sun. In the autumn they did not fall, but turned to pale gold. In the spring it bore golden blossom in clusters like a cherry, which bloomed on during the summer, and as soon as the flowers opened, the leaves fell, so that through spring and summer a grove of Mallinorn was carpeted and roofed with gold, but its pillars were of grey silver. The only place that the mallorn were known to flourish in Middle-earth was in Lothlórien, under the careful eye of Galadriel. Her canopy of magic was enough to allow the tree to flourish, even outside of its heavenly homeland, and the beauty of these trees is known all across the land. Humans called Lothlórien the Golden Wood, and the name Lothlórien means dream blossom, and it is derived from the golden blossoms of the mallorn tree. All of Lothlórien is rich with this enchanted vitality, and many plants and flowers grow there that cannot be grown anywhere else, such as the Eleanor blossom. The Eleanor is a small, many-petaled flower, which can be any color, although in Lothlórien most of them are yellow and gold. They appear all throughout Lothlórien, but they seem to grow particularly on the hill where Aragorn and Arwen, years before, reunited and pledged themselves to each other. As they're passing through, Aragorn makes it a special point to stop there. At the hill's foot, Frodo found Aragorn, standing still and silent as a tree, but in his hand was a small golden bloom of Eleanor, and a light was in his eyes. He was wrapped in some fair memory, and as Frodo looked at him, he knew that he beheld things as they once had been in this same place. The Eleanor flower, like the proud mallorn tree, is a symbol of the magic of Middle-earth, still alive and working. This is a sorcery only possible because of Galadriel's influence, but there are special cases in which that magic can pass out of her lands. Once the journey is over and the hobbits have returned home, Sam is trying to think of a name for his first daughter that he's having with Rosie Cotton, and Frodo suggests Eleanor. Sam was also given the greatest gift of all by Galadriel, a sprinkling of soil from Lothlórien's gardens and a single mallorn nut. He planted that seed and he scattered the dust from Lothlórien all across the Shire, and it's only a matter of time before the magic returns. Spring surpassed his wildest hopes. His trees began to sprout and grow, as if time was in a hurry and wished to make 1 year do for 20. In the party field, a beautiful young sapling leapt up. It had silver bark and long leaves and burst into golden flowers in April. It was indeed a mallorn, and it was the wonder of the neighborhood. In after years, as it grew in grace and beauty, it was known far and wide, and people would come long journeys to see it. The only mallorn west of the mountains and east of the sea, and one of the finest in the world. The beautiful gardens of Lothlórien are a testament to the power of good care, of good stewardship, but not every plant in Middle-earth would have such stewardship. This was one of the primary concerns of the Valar Yavanna. She was the mother of all living and growing things, second only in power to Varda, the Valar of the stars. And yet, Yavanna feared the creations of her husband, Aule. Aule was the smithing Valar, who had created the dwarves, who was teaching the elves to smith, to craft, to burn, to create. Yavanna was worried that the Olvar, plants, would not be able to defend themselves from the Kelvar, animals and other living, breathing, working things. Of all thy realm, what dost thou hold dearest? All have their worth, said Yavanna, and each contributes to the worth of the others. But the Kelvar can flee or defend themselves, whereas the Olvar that grow cannot. And among these, I hold trees dear, Long in the growing, swift shall they be in the felling, and unless they pay toll, with fruit upon bough, little mourned in their passing. So I see in my thought. Would that the trees might speak on behalf of all things that have roots, and punish those that wrong them. Then Manwe sat silent, and the thought of Yavanna that she had put into his heart grew and unfolded, and it was beheld by Iluvatar. Manwe said, O Kementari, Eru hath spoken, saying, Behold, when the children awake, then the thought of Yavanna will awake also, and it will summon spirits from afar, and they will go among the Kelvar and the Olvar, and some will dwell therein, and be held in reverence, and their just anger shall be feared. It's unknown if the Ents were independent creatures that took on the appearance of trees, or if they were spirits that imbued themselves into trees and so looked like trees. But either way, they are the unequivocal lords of leaf, stone, tree, and water. It's because of them that people whisper of strange things moving in the forest, of trees with opinions. Merry and Pippin came face to face with the reality of these stories when they are found by Treebeard. And he looked, by all definitions, like a tree. A tree with a face. His skin was bark, his beard was moss, and his eyes were brown and green. Pippin later recalled, One felt as if there was an enormous well behind him, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. But their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. Long ago, the Ents were accompanied by their Ent wives, and there were baby Ents, and they flourished. However, the Ents loved the wild world, the open skies, mountain streams, whereas the Entwives preferred a bit more order. They liked to cultivate herbs and grasses in the wide open plains. They did not desire to speak with these things, but they wished them to hear and obey what was said to them. The Entwives ordered them to grow according to their wishes, and bear leaf and fruit to their liking. For the Entwives desired order and plenty and peace, by which they meant that things should remain where they had set them. So the Entwives made gardens to live in, but we Ents went on wandering, and we only came to the gardens now and again. The Ents and the Entwives gradually grew apart, until one day the Entwives were lost. Not dead per se, just lost, and the Ents didn't know where to find them. Now, with their wives gone, the numbers of Ents dwindle, and the oldest of them are beginning to fall asleep, to just become trees. However, they are able in The Lord of the Rings to rally one last time against the forces of evil in the world, as they take down Saruman. As vengeance for all that Saruman has done to harm the green growing world, the Ents tear Isengard apart brick by brick. They slaughter the orcs, and they release the river Isen to flood it out. In the Ents, Tolkien wanted to give agency to the trees, to give them a voice, something that he feared they would be lost without. Tolkien had always loved trees. His mother had taught him botany when he was younger, and trees were his favorite. He would climb them, he would sit in them, he would even sometimes talk to them. Unfortunately, he came to learn that not everybody liked trees as much as he did. He wrote, "There was a great tree, a huge poplar with vast limbs visible through my window even as I lay in bed. I loved it, and was anxious about it. A foolish neighbor was agitated to have it felled. Every tree has its enemy. Few have an advocate. Too often the hate is irrational, a fear of anything large and alive, and not easily tamed or destroyed." One of the most resounding themes that comes up again and again in Tolkien's discussions about any plants is just how easily they can be lost, how easily they can be destroyed and killed. And this was a sentiment earned through personal hardship. When he was young, Tolkien and his mother and his brother moved out into the countryside hamlet of Sarehole. The verdant forests, deep ponds, and sandy quarries and irritable neighbors became the landscape of Tolkien's imagination. And he and his brother whiled away warm summers, exploring, playing, and making up languages. Unfortunately, this couldn't last forever. They had to move back into the city when his mother Mabel was cut off from the rest of her family over religious differences. There was a train that ran behind their house, and there were some trees and flowers there, but it was nothing like the paradise that Tolkien had become used to. It was years until they were able to get back out to the countryside, and even once they had made it back out there, it was tinged by sorrow. In a cottage that looked much like their blissful haven at Sarehole, Tolkien's mother Mabel died of diabetes complications. Tolkien and his brother were bundled off to live with a distant relative in the city, but it felt like something had been broken. Ronald, still numb from the shock of his mother's death, hated the view of almost unbroken rooftops with the factory chimneys beyond. The green countryside was just visible in the distance, but it now belonged to a remote past that could not be regained. He was trapped in the city. His mother's death had severed him from the open air, from Licky Hill, where he had gathered bilberries, and from the Rednell cottage, where they had been so happy. And because it was the loss of his mother that had taken him away from all these things, he came to associate them with her. To Tolkien, the countryside, freedom, and green growing things were wrapped in layers of emotional and philosophical meaning. The Lord of the Rings was written to reclaim the mythos that Tolkien felt had been lost, the mythos of England, of a wide open, free country, not cut up by fences and petty land disputes, but untamed. He grew up as the Industrial Revolution was claiming Europe, planes, cars, and electricity quickly taking over the old ways of life. And when he looked back on his life, there were two very distinct periods that he could recall. A before of sun-drenched summers, of an open countryside, of his mother and his whole life ahead of him, and the after, when all of that was no more. The Lord of the Rings makes plants so meaningful because, to Tolkien, they were. They were representative of everything that mattered: love, grandeur, remembrance, and loss. For him, they were the perfect metaphor, and he uses them everywhere in his writing. In his short story, Leaf by Niggle, the artist Niggle, his great work is painting a tree, a life's work that is only fully realized after his death and on his journey to heaven. In his legendary poetry collection, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, the woodsman, Tom Bombadil, ambles through the forest taking care of the fantastical plants and trees. And in a poem to his wife, Tolkien wrote, "Lo, young we are, and yet have stood like planted hearts in the great sun of love, so long as two fair trees in woodland or in open dale stand utterly entwined, and breathe the airs and suck the very light together, that we have become as one, deep-rooted in the soil of life and tangled in sweet growth." Tolkien's use of plants is a firm reminder that even everyday things, the flowers on the side of the road, the hemlock umbels tucked into a forest, the ancient tree sitting on your front lawn, any of that can be magical, as long as you look at it with the right eyes. There are so many different plants in Middle-earth, and if I tried to get to all of them in this video, it would be like 12 hours long, and it's gonna start raining pretty soon, so I can't do that. But if you do want a really in-depth look created by an actual botanist, I highly recommend the Flora of Middle-earth. I probably used some of the illustrations from this in this video. It goes into extreme detail, covers every plant that is mentioned, covers the ecosystems, incredibly comprehensive, and I will link that in the description. It is fully raining now, so I'm gonna try and be quick. In the comments, let me know what your favorite plant out of these ones is, and if I didn't get to your favorite plant, tell me a little bit about it in the comments. This video is made through the support of my patrons, a group that I am incredibly grateful for, and I absolutely could not do this without you guys. Like this video if you learned something new, and consider subscribing if you want to come back for a new video every single week. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.